So my name is Zara Brodie and I'm a lecturer in psychology at the University of the West of Scotland.
Yeah, that sounds good as well. So I'll keep these out, the earphones out, and it should be okay.
Okay.
So I'll need to get that on film anyway.
Yeah.
So can you introduce yourself and say what your title is here at the university?
So my name is Dr. Zara Brodie and I'm a psychologist and a lecturer in psychology at the University of the West of Scotland.
And so can you sort of talk about your background in psychology?
So I did my PhD in developmental psychology at Queen Margaret University, specifically looking at how early experiences are related to how people regulate their emotions later in adulthood.
Alright, okay. And so just going on to the thing that I'm doing, so mine is on the representation of mental health in television, but sort of more focusing on social media.
Okay.
So can you maybe sort of explain, do you think that social media can have a bad impact on someone's mental health, or can it have a positive impact?
I think there's kind of two sides to that argument that social media can be helpful for mental illness. So obviously in some sense it can be incredibly positive because it's a great place to form a community, a support community, which is important for therapeutic outcomes for people. So having a safe venting space where you can talk about your experiences in a sort of uncensored way, so no one's kind of checking in on what you're saying, it really allows you to share your experiences in an open way. And it's also a great place to find people who have similar experiences. So a lot of the time people will experience things related to their mental illness that aren't necessarily listed on the leaflet or on the NHS website. So by talking to other people that have the same illness, they can actually find some common ground and find some comfort in the fact that they're not the only person experiencing that. Obviously there is a potential negative to this as well, because not all communities online are going to be healthy communities. I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago, we saw a real surge in these pro-eating disorder communities on Tumblr and LiveJournal and things like that. And the issue with these communities, they were supportive in their own way, but they tended to encourage negative disorder-related behaviours. So for someone who's attempting to achieve recovery, maintain recovery, it's a very triggering environment and it can actually be a real barrier to treatment. So there are positive and negative aspects to social media as a mental health community, and it's just about ensuring that people are accessing the more healthy community options. And a lot of social media networks are making efforts to do that now. So you can no longer search for pro-eating disorder hashtags and things on Instagram. You get a little alert that directs you to support websites. So there's definitely an awareness within social media communities that that's an issue, and there does seem to be things in place to try and protect against that a little bit.
Yeah. And see, what do you think about people like creating their own videos, like YouTubers or even filmmakers? Do you think that can be quite a therapeutic experience? Can it possibly help to vent how they're feeling? Or?
Yeah, I think it can be a really therapeutic process for people to create their own content that's related to their experience of mental illness, because a lot of the time they don't really have that outlet. They don't really feel comfortable sharing their experiences with their friends or family because it's a little bit too close to home. They might be worried about how their friends or family would feel about the way that they're feeling, whether they would take it personally, that they're unhappy and things like that. So I think being able to create content and put it online for like-minded people can be quite an empowering process. So it's kind of like you're taking your illness back, you're taking control of your illness, and you're deciding how it's going to be represented on the platform that you're using. So I think that can be a really helpful process for people.
Yeah. And do you think sort of content like this encourages other people to open up about their mental health?
I think it does, because I think especially in instances where people receive positive feedback. So if you see a video that's been uploaded that's talking about a disorder that you have, and you see that all the comments in the thread below are really supportive, really positive, encouraging from other people who have similar experiences, sharing that actually this has helped them and saying how it's been useful for them, I think that can often encourage people to then do that themselves. But what I think's even more important about this type of content is that you don't have to respond in that way if you don't want to. So there's no requirement that because someone shared their content with you, that you're going to then share your experiences back with them. It's completely up to you whether you decide to then go on and make your own content. And I think that just provides a really interesting juxtaposition to face-to-face therapeutic interventions. If you go along to a group therapy session, you're expected to provide some of your own experiences. Whereas in this online platform, you can do that if you'd like to do that, if you think it would be helpful for you, but there's no pressure to do that there is with face-to-face therapeutic sessions.
And do you think this helps to reduce the stigma associated with mental illness?
Absolutely. I think any chance that people have to talk about mental illness openly in a sort of uncensored way is going to be helpful in reducing the stigma, because that's one of the kind of key factors in stigma, is the fact that we're not talking about it. And obviously we are starting to talk a little bit more about things like depression, eating disorders, anxiety, but there's still a lot of disorders that we're not really addressing and that still aren't, they're not given the same airtime, let's say, as other things. So I think especially for disorders that are a little bit more rare, using this type of online platform to talk about these disorders and let people know that there's others out there who are suffering with them is incredibly useful in reducing the stigma around mental illness.
And how important do you think it is to talk about our mental health?
It's very, very important to talk about our mental health. So one of the sort of key barriers to recovery or to experiencing any sort of positive therapeutic outcome is being able to express what you're feeling. And not only express it, but have that back and forth of sharing your experience with other people. So I think there's really no way for us to reduce the stigma around mental health unless people are sharing their experiences and being open about their experiences. I'm not sure if I answered you. I've kind of forgot what that question was at the end there.
I can just listen to
if there's anyone's
noticed that it started peaking a wee bit.
Okay.
I'll keep these on and go for the question again.
Yeah, if there's any ones you want to ask me again, just do, because sometimes I ramble.
No, it was good. So I think the shot is looking good. I just sort of wish I could concentrate on that.
I know, yeah, and do both.
No, it looks good.
Good.
So I'll go through that question again. I think I've even forgotten.
I know, I'm trying to remember which one it was.
Does this help to reduce the stigma?
I think, yeah.
Was it that?
I think it was I think we did that one. I think you went to the next one, but then I answered it kind of similar, so I said stigma again.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
So I'll ask that one again then. How important is it to talk about our mental health?
It's hugely important to talk about our mental health. I think one of the key barriers to positive therapeutic outcomes is that kind of reluctance to share what we're going through. And I think one of the biggest reasons for that is the fear that people aren't going to understand. So we don't feel comfortable sharing with our friends or sharing with our family or sharing with our GP even what we're feeling, because we're not sure if it's right, if it's wrong, if anyone else is going through the same thing. So I think it's really important to talk about what we're going through and share our experience. And I think if there's a safe place that we can do that potentially there's a little bit less pressure and less anxiety associated with it, then that's really great. And I think these online platforms like YouTube really allow people to do that in a safe way.
Yeah. And I think you already sort of answered this one, but is social media harmful to our mental health?
It can be harmful, and not always in as an extreme a way as to lead to mental illness, but just in general for our well-being, for everybody. So as human beings, we're much more prone to social comparison. It's quite difficult for us to look at other people and not judge our own social or personal strengths or weaknesses based on how we measure up to other people. So when we're on Facebook or Twitter or any of those social media platforms every day, people are posting positive experiences that they've had, they're posting about their holidays, they're posting about their promotions. People don't tend to post the negative stuff so much. So all we're really seeing is a kind of rose-coloured version of our friends' lives, our families' lives, celebrities' lives. We're not seeing the negative aspects. So it's pretty impossible for us to measure. Should I start that again? Because I went and looked up. Okay, I'll start again. Definitely there can be some negative aspects to engaging with social media. Not even as extreme as mental illness, but even just for our everyday well-being for everyone in society. Because as human beings, we tend to compare ourselves to other people. We're prone to social comparison. And when people engage with social media, they want to present themselves in positive ways. So those two things don't really match up. People are going to post more positive things about their life. They're going to post about their promotions, about their holidays, about the great things that their family and their children are up to, but they're not going to post about the negative things. So if that's all you've got to compare yourself to in terms of your friends' lives and your family's lives, then it's pretty impossible for you to live up to that. So you're always going to feel like you're falling a little bit short compared to everyone in your social network. So that can have a real impact, I think, on your self-esteem. And you know, that just goes further and further when you start thinking about things like filters and Photoshop, where people are posting the perfect selfies. Again, that's just more sort of ammunition for you to compare yourself to. But that's not always going to be negative. Sometimes there are really positive things that can encourage you to improve your life. So there's a big fitness movement on Instagram, for example. So if you're trying to be fit and healthy, you can follow people who have fitness blogs, and actually it can encourage you to improve your life. So there's two sides to every story, and I think it's quite hard to get the positives of social media engagement without having to take the negatives in turn a little bit.
Yeah. And what do you think about the media representation of mental illness? I think I've already discussed this, but sort of talking about tabloid newspapers or even like celebrities. What do you think about celebrity culture opening up? Like, I don't know if you know Zoella, like the YouTubers.
Oh, right, yeah.
They've sort of come out and they've made videos that they've got anxiety and things. And there's a lot of things that people are saying, is that actually true? Are they sort of jumping on the bandwagon? So kind of like, I don't know how to word it, but the media representation of mental health, is it positive or negative?
I think there are a lot of efforts being made to improve how mental health is represented in the media. So we've got a lot more in terms of TV shows and reality shows that have characters or are entirely focused on people who are suffering with mental illness. And I think that is really positive. But I think what we tend to see in terms of fictional media and in terms of mental illness is that it's a very sort of stereotyped representation of it, a very loud, very in-your-face representation of mental illness, and that I think encourages this stigma that we have about, you know, people with mental illness are chaotic or are just always on the edge and a little bit manic. So I think that's definitely problematic. And then there's the other side of that where you have all of these celebrities or YouTubers or Instagrammers coming out and talking about their mental illness. And I think that generally is more positive because I think especially in cases where you're seeing a blogger whose blog is not focused on mental illness, for example, like a beauty blogger, and they come out and talk in one of their episodes about the fact that they actually struggle with depression or with anxiety or with something else. And I think what reducing stigma is all about is really just highlighting that anybody can suffer with these types of symptoms. So someone that you admire, someone that you realise has an entirely different personality, also suffers with mental illness. So it kind of raises the awareness that mental illness is not the foundation of a person's personality. It's just a tiny little addition to their personality. So I think it's really helpful when people that you potentially wouldn't expect to have mental illness come out and talk about the fact that they do have symptoms of a mental illness. Whether or not it's always genuine or whether it's sort of becoming a little bit of a fad to say we're experiencing mental illness and we need to talk about it. I don't know whether that's a problem, really, because any way that we can get people to talk about it and to open up about mental illness is positive. So even if Kim Kardashian says that she has anxiety or something like that, even if she doesn't really have a clinical level of anxiety, it still is opening up the forum for her fans to also say, actually, I suffer with anxiety too, and it's helpful to know that even if I have anxiety, I can still be successful.
Yeah, that was really good.
Good.
I'm just sort of...
You might have to do a bit of cutting because I feel like I talk a lot.
No, it's good. I'm just sort of trying to look and see. It's fine.
Good.
I don't know, I've sort of like missed out a few questions, but I think it's because you have covered a lot.
I talk.
No,
Yeah.
because it's covered
I'm
a
trying to see if there's any points that I'd noted down to mention that would come up in anything.
I think we already discussed this, but does it encourage other people to open or other people to create their own content? 'Cause there's quite a few new bloggers and YouTubers and.
Yeah, so I think my answer that I'd noted down for that was pretty similar, I think, to one of the other ones I'd said. But I can say it again anyway, it means you've got more to cut from. So yeah, I think watching content from other YouTubers or vloggers or bloggers that talks about their experiences with mental illness could encourage other people to make their own content around that sort of thing. Because what it's doing is it's showing that there's a platform for this. They'll see people interacting with that content, liking it, commenting on it, and especially in cases where those comments are positive, people might feel like actually this is a safe thing for me to do. I can talk about my mental illness and the backlash will be a positive one, it won't be a negative one. So yeah, I think it could give people the confidence to realise that people are out there to listen to what they have to say, and it actually can help some other people. So by sharing their story, they might be able to help someone else just how that original poster helped them.
Mm-hmm. That's good. And I think this will probably be one. No, there's two more actually. I've just noticed. So this will be the one. Does filmmaking or vlogging act as a good platform?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, but I feel like I might repeat myself a wee bit, but
that's fine.
it's okay.
So I'll just like ask the question again.
Yeah.
So yeah, does filmmaking or vlogging act as a good platform?
I think filmmaking and vlogging is an incredibly useful platform to talk about mental illness because it differs slightly from the sort of more written content like blogs, journals and things like that, because you can actually put a face to the experience. So I think being able to almost make one-way eye contact with the person that's created this vlog content is really powerful for the person watching it. And we know from research that people do build quite strong bonds with individuals that they follow on YouTube and on other vlogging platforms. So if someone that they've built this interaction with is talking to them about their mental illness, it can feel very much like a two-way interaction. So it feels like they're the only person that they're talking to, they're talking directly to them. So I think using video footage as opposed to written content just has a propensity to connect the viewer a little bit more deeply. And when we're talking about mental illness, I think that's only going to be more positive.
Yeah, sort of like that was more what I was wanting to get from that question.
Oh, good.
And a final one will be, what does this do to any preconceptions about mental illness sort of created by fictional content, 13 Reasons Why, and even like the films that have created a really bad stigma, like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and sort of films like that. So do you think because this is real people talking directly to a camera with little editing, do you think that is, does that like sort of destroy any preconceptions about mental health or reduce them?
Interesting, okay. Yeah, so I think this sort of vlog video content is a really good way of changing people's perceptions about mental illness. So we see in a lot of the fictionalized media that it's a very extreme, very stereotyped view of what mental illness is. So we see someone with mental illness as being very chaotic, as always being on the edge, always close to suicide. So we get a very extreme view, and I think that increases the stigma alongside mental illness. But with this type of content, what you're getting is someone just plainly and simply talking about their experiences. And they're talking about it tends to be in a much less glamorous way. So they're not glamorizing self-harm, they're not glamorizing the symptoms of their disorder, but they're talking about it in a real way. So they're talking about how it affects their everyday life, going to work, going to university, bringing up their children. So I think being able to listen to someone who's going through this experience in a real way, who's living a life that's potentially similar to yours, is going to have a much stronger impact on people who are also experiencing that illness, but also people who aren't experiencing it, people who have a little understanding of mental illness. I think viewing this type of content will just improve their understanding of what mental illness is really like and what it's like to live with a mental illness.
Yeah. I'll just double check, but I think that's everything. If there was anything else that you wanted to say?
Yeah, I'm just thinking what else there is that's noted. I think I've probably said all of it in.
But that is really beneficial.
Oh, good. Hopefully your editing skills are good. It's like chop.
Good.
Yeah.
And maybe one more. I think you have sort of addressed this, but does it help to enhance people's understandings, like say like a short film on depression, or even like one of the more serious mental illnesses like bipolar? Do you think that does educate people in a way?
So what do you mean by short films? So
Well,
just
like,
to make sure I know what sort of thing you mean.
Well, the festival that I was filming at, it's like, see, even what I'm making is kind of sort of like a short film, like even a documentary or a drama. So it's kind of like a fictional thing, but a lot of the people that are creating them have a low budget and they aren't able to, like, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I think it's sort of, do you think they do educate, or even just the YouTube videos, do you think they educate people that may not know much about a mental illness? Does it help to develop people's understandings? Or?
Yeah, I think that like video content of any sort can be really useful in improving people's understanding of mental illness when they don't really have anything to base it on, so when they don't have experience of mental illness. So I think short films especially can be useful in depicting experiences of living with mental illness, and I think these types of films have the propensity to show it in a more realistic way, because they don't have this glamorized Hollywood shine to them. So I think it can be a really useful platform for people to build an understanding of mental illness in a sort of short and punchy way that you wouldn't get from a feature film that's trying to show the more glamorous side of mental illness.
Yeah. No, that was really
okay. I'm like, is that what you mean? The only other thing I had noted down that I didn't mention was, when we were talking about the media representation, is the fact that most of the time it's females we see with mental illness. So I would maybe say a wee something about that.
Yeah. Okay.
What you also tend to find a lot of the time in like fictionalized media and in TV programs is that it's females that often suffer with mental illness. So it's the female that has anxiety, the female that has bipolar disorder. And I think what's really important is that we need to understand that mental illness is not a female problem at all. And by not representing it in video content, etc., in males, we're just increasing the stigma against male mental illness, and we're creating a barrier against support seeking in males. So I think one of the benefits of YouTube content, of blogs, of video blogs, is that you do tend to see a lot more male sufferers coming forward and talking about their experiences. So it might provide a safer place for males who are experiencing symptoms of mental illness to go and interact with other people who have that experience without worrying that they're going to be judged about it because of the stigma that's surrounding it.
Yeah, that was good. And one other thing that sort of come to me, do you think there's a mental illness that maybe isn't addressed enough in the media?
Oh my God, there's a million. I'm trying to think if there is any one that would be specifically worth talking about.
Because when I was speaking to Eddie, more so, because the essay that I'm doing is different to this, because this is more so about content that anyone can make. It doesn't have to be a professional, but what I spoke to Eddie about was like films and whether documentaries are more obviously factual and they're based on real life events.
Oh, okay.
And he sort of said one of the illnesses that he thinks needs to be covered more is schizophrenia. He said, but I don't know how that would come across in a blog or a vlog or...
Yeah, I think I could mention that, to be honest. I don't know a huge amount about schizophrenia, but I can always just flag it. So I think what we tend to see in like media content, in terms of mental illness, there's a huge focus on things like anxiety, depression, and that's because people who don't suffer with mental illness can often relate to those type of disorders. So everyone's felt a bit down, everyone's felt a bit anxious. So we're more open to that sort of information in terms of mental health. But there's so many other disorders that don't get the airtime that they really deserve. And I think, again, that's just increasing the stigma for people who are living with those disorders. So things like borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia. So we see very few episodes of psychosis in television, and if we do, again, it's just illustrated as a very violent, very dangerous disorder. So I think if people who have experience of psychotic episodes or schizophrenia were to blog about this and create video content about this, talking about their experiences, then I think that would go a long way to provide support for people who are suffering with it, because it can be a very terrifying disorder to suffer from. And I think there's just a real lack of shared experience in terms of disorders like that.
Mm-hmm.